Hey, welcome back to English in Advance. I'm Jessica, and if you are watching this right now, I want you to know something. You are already doing something most people never do. You are choosing to practice on purpose. You are not waiting until your English magically gets better. You are showing up, and that matters more than you think. So thank you for being here. Seriously. Now, before we get started today, I want to ask you something. Have you ever sat down to write an essay in English, opened a blank document, and just stared at it? Like you know what you want to say. You have ideas. You have opinions. But somehow, that very first sentence just will not come. You do not know how to start. You do not know what to write first. And the longer you stare, the worse it gets. If that sounds familiar, you are in exactly the right place today. Because today, we are going to talk about something that makes a massive difference in your writing. We are going to talk about how to write a strong introduction for any essay. And I mean any essay. Whether it is a school assignment, a university application, an IELTS task, a business report, a personal essay, a formal academic paper, or even a job application letter that has an essay component. Once you understand the principles behind a great introduction, you can apply them everywhere. That is what we are building today. Not just a template you copy and paste, but a real understanding that you carry with you into every writing situation. Now, I want to be very honest with you right from the start. A lot of people teach essay introductions by giving you a formula. They say, okay, write 3 sentences. Here is sentence 1. Here is sentence 2. Here is sentence 3. Done. And look, formulas are not useless. They give you a starting point. But the problem with only learning a formula is that when the situation changes a little, when the topic is different or the type of essay is different, you get stuck again. You memorize the formula, but you do not understand the reason behind it. And understanding the reason is what gives you real power as a writer. So today, we are going to go deeper than a formula. We are going to understand why introductions work the way they do, what they are actually trying to do for the reader, and how you can make smart choices as a writer. And because this is a listening practice episode, we are going to do this in a very particular way. I am going to talk, and you are going to listen and follow along. But I am also going to give you moments to pause, to think, and to practice. So this is not just passive listening. This is active English work. Okay, let us begin. First, let us think about what an introduction actually is. And I do not mean this in a complicated way. I just want us to think about it from the most basic angle possible. Why does an essay even have an introduction? Why do we not just jump straight into the main body? Why do we not just start with paragraph 1 of the content and let the reader figure out what we are talking about? Think about it this way. Imagine you walk into a room where a conversation is already happening. People are talking. There is energy, there is argument, there is debate. But you walked in late and you have no idea what they are talking about. You hear words, but they do not connect to anything in your mind because you do not have the context. That is what it feels like to read an essay with no introduction. You are dropped into ideas without any map, without any sense of where you are going, without any reason to care. An introduction does something very specific. It builds a bridge. It takes the reader from wherever they are, from their everyday world, from their existing knowledge, from their questions and curiosities, and it walks them gently toward the specific conversation you want to have in your essay. That is the job. Build the bridge. Get the reader from there to here. And once you think of it that way, everything about writing introductions starts to make more sense. So what does a strong introduction need to do? There are 3 things, and I want you to hear these 3 things not as a checklist, but as a purpose. The introduction needs to catch the reader's attention. It needs to give the reader enough context to understand what the essay is about. And it needs to tell the reader where the essay is going, what your main argument or position is, attention, context, direction. Those 3 things. If your introduction does all 3 of those things well, it is a strong introduction. It really is that simple, even though the execution takes practice. Let us spend some real time on the first one. Attention, catching the reader's attention. This is what teachers and professors often call the hook. And I want to talk about this carefully because I think there are some big misunderstandings about what a good hook looks like. First, the misunderstanding that I see most often. A lot of students think that a good hook means starting with something dramatic or extreme. They write things like, "In today's world, everything is changing," or, "Since the beginning of human history, people have always struggled with this problem," or, "This is one of the most important issues facing our society today." And I understand why students write these kinds of openings. They sound big. They sound important. They feel like they are setting the stage. But here is the truth. These kinds of openings are so generic, so overused, so vague, that they do not actually catch anyone's attention. A reader who has read even a few essays has seen these phrases hundreds of times. They create no curiosity. They promise nothing specific. They could apply to literally any essay about any topic. They are the essay writing equivalent of saying, "Hello, how are you? Fine, thanks. How are you? Fine." It is technically a conversation, but nobody is really listening. So what actually works? What actually catches a reader's attention? Let me give you several different types of hooks that work well, and I want to explain why each one works, not just what it looks like. The first type is the surprising fact or statistic. This works because our brains are wired to notice things that contradict our expectations. When we hear something that does not fit our existing model of the world, we pay attention. We want to understand why. We want to reconcile the new information with what we already know. So if you are writing about education, for example, you might open with something like this. According to a study conducted by Cambridge University, students who read for pleasure for just 20 minutes a day consistently outperform their peers in vocabulary, comprehension, and critical thinking, even when those peers spend twice as long on structured study. Now that is interesting. That is specific. That makes you think. It makes you want to read on because now you are curious. You want to know more about this. Why would 20 minutes of pleasure reading beat structured study? What does this mean for how we approach education? You have questions, and the essay is promising to explore them. That is what a good hook does. Now let me give you a practice moment right here. I want you to pause the audio for 60 seconds. Think about an essay topic that you might write about soon. It could be anything. Technology and children, the benefits of remote work, climate change, gender equality, urban poverty, anything. Now think of one surprising fact or statistic related to that topic that you could use as a hook. You do not need to have the exact number right now. Just think about whether there is something surprising about that topic that most people might not expect, something that defies common assumptions. Pause now if you want to do that exercise, and then come back. Good. The second type of hook is a specific anecdote or short story. This one is powerful because human beings respond to stories. We always have. Before we had books, before we had schools, before we had universities, we had stories around fires. Stories are how we learn, how we remember, how we connect emotionally to ideas. A short, specific, vivid story at the beginning of an essay immediately does two things. It creates a scene, a visual, a feeling, and it creates empathy, a connection between the reader and the situation being described. This hook works especially well in argumentative essays, personal essays, and opinion pieces. For example, imagine you are writing an essay about the importance of mental health support in the workplace. You could open like this. When Clara walked into her manager's office and said she needed a few days off for her mental health, she expected understanding. What she got instead was a raised eyebrow and a cold suggestion to try yoga. That day, she submitted her resignation. Clara's story is not unique. Millions of employees around the world navigate workplaces where mental health is still treated as weakness rather than necessity. Now, that is a different kind of opening. It has a person in it. It has a moment. It has emotion. The reader immediately feels something about Clara's situation, and that feeling becomes the emotional engine that drives them into the rest of the essay. The third type of hook is a thought-provoking question. And I want to be careful here because not all questions work. A weak question is one that is too broad, too obvious, or one that the reader does not feel connected to. For example, have you ever thought about the environment? That is a weak question. Of course, people have thought about the environment. It is too vague. It does not pull anyone in. A strong question is specific, personal, and creates genuine reflection in the reader's mind. For example, if you are writing about the impact of social media on mental health, you might open with, "How many times today have you checked your phone without really meaning to? How many times did you put it down feeling slightly worse than before you picked it up? If you have lost count, you are not alone." That is a strong question hook. It is specific. It connects directly to the reader's personal experience. It creates a moment of self-reflection, and it opens directly into the topic without being vague. The fourth type of hook is a bold statement or a strong claim. This one works well for argumentative essays where you are taking a clear position. The idea is to open with your argument right from the very first line, stated boldly and confidently in a way that makes the reader want to either agree enthusiastically or challenge you. Either reaction is good because it means the reader is engaged. For example, the traditional classroom is obsolete. Every year, millions of children sit in rows of desks, memorize facts they will forget within weeks, and are taught by a system designed for a world that no longer exists. Education does not need reform. It needs reinvention. Now, you might agree with that, you might disagree, but you are definitely not bored. You have a reaction. You want to know what this person is going to argue. That engagement is exactly what a hook is supposed to create. The fifth type of hook is a relevant quote. And again, I want to be careful here because a lot of students overuse quotes. They reach for a famous quote by Einstein or Shakespeare or Mandela and drop it at the beginning of every essay, regardless of whether it is actually relevant. A quote only works as a hook when it is genuinely connected to the specific argument you are making, when it illuminates something in a fresh way, and when it is not so overused that it has become meaningless. If you are using a quote, make sure it is one that most people have not heard 1,000 times, and make sure you connect it directly to your topic in the very next sentence. Okay, so we have talked about 5 types of hooks: surprising facts or statistics, short anecdotes, thought-provoking questions, bold statements, and relevant quotes. Now here is something important I want to say. You do not always need just one type. Sometimes the most powerful openings combine 2 of these. You might start with a short anecdote and then follow it with a surprising statistic. Or you might open with a bold statement and then immediately support it with a surprising fact. The combination can be very effective. The key is that whatever you choose, it must feel organic, natural, and directly connected to what your essay is actually about. A hook that is interesting but disconnected from the topic is actually worse than a weak hook because it misleads the reader. Let us do another practice moment. I want you to take the topic you were thinking about earlier, the one you came up with for the first practice. Now I want you to try writing 3 different hooks for that same topic. Try 1 surprising fact or statistic hook. Try 1 short anecdote hook. And try 1 bold statement hook. Just do them in your head or on paper. Try to write them quickly without overthinking them. The goal is not perfection right now. The goal is practice. Pause if you want to do that exercise. Now let us talk about the second thing a strong introduction needs to do: context. Giving the reader enough background to understand what the essay is about. This is the part of the introduction that comes after the hook, and it is sometimes called the background information or the context sentences. And this part is where a lot of students make one of 2 opposite mistakes. Mistake number 1 is giving too much context. The introduction becomes a history lesson. The student tries to explain everything about the topic from the very beginning of time, covering 300 years of history and every possible angle of the issue before even arriving at the actual argument. This makes the introduction incredibly long, incredibly boring, and it buries the important information under layers of unnecessary detail. The reader loses the thread completely. Mistake number 2 is giving too little context. The student writes a hook and then immediately jumps to the thesis without any connecting information. This leaves the reader slightly disoriented. They got your attention with the hook, but now they are not quite sure what the specific conversation is. They do not have enough context to understand why your argument matters or where it comes from. The sweet spot is somewhere in the middle. The context sentences should do a specific job. They should narrow the focus from the broader topic to the specific aspect you are writing about. Think of it as a funnel. The wide top of the funnel is the general topic. As you move down through the introduction, you narrow it, you get more specific, you zoom in, until by the time you reach the end of the introduction, you are at the narrowest point, which is your specific argument or thesis. Let me show you what I mean. Suppose the essay topic is this: should smartphones be banned in primary schools? The broad topic is technology and education. That is the top of the funnel. As you write your context sentences, you start to narrow down. You might say something like, technology has become central to almost every aspect of modern life, transforming how we work, communicate, and access information. In education, digital devices have opened up new possibilities for learning, from interactive content to personalized study tools. However, as smartphone use among young children has grown dramatically, questions have emerged about whether these devices belong in the hands of young learners during school hours. Now you are getting closer to the specific issue. From there, you lead into your thesis, and that funnel movement, from broad to specific, from general to particular, is what the context sentences are supposed to accomplish. The number of context sentences you need depends on the length and complexity of the essay. For a short essay of 500 to 800 words, you might need just 2 or 3 context sentences. For a longer academic essay of 2,000 words or more, you might need 5 or 6. But the principle is the same. Move from broad to specific. Build the path that leads to your thesis. Here is something else I want to point out about context sentences. They should be informative, but they should not be your arguments. This is a very common mistake. Students start making their case in the context sentences before they have even stated their thesis. The context is not where you argue. The context is where you orient. Save the arguing for the body paragraphs. In the introduction, you are just setting the stage. Let me give you a full example of a strong hook and context section together, and then I will add the thesis to complete the introduction. The topic is this: is social media doing more harm than good to society? Here is the hook. In 2010, the average person spent less than 30 minutes per day on social media. By 2024, that number had climbed to over 2.5 hours for adults and nearly 5 hours for teenagers. That is more time than most people spend eating, exercising, and talking to family members combined. Those are striking numbers, and they raise an urgent question. What exactly are we doing with all that time, and what is it doing to us? And here are the context sentences. Social media platforms have undeniably changed the way people connect, share, and consume information. From reuniting lost friends to organizing political movements, these platforms have demonstrated remarkable power to bring people together across geographical and cultural divides. Yet alongside these benefits, a growing body of research points to serious consequences, particularly for younger users, including rising rates of anxiety, depression, comparison culture, and addiction-like behavior. As these platforms continue to evolve and expand their reach into every corner of daily life, the question of their net impact on human well-being has become one of the defining conversations of our time. Notice what happened there. We started with a specific statistic that was surprising. We moved into broader context about what social media does. We acknowledged both the benefits and the concerns, and we ended the context section by signaling that this debate is important and ongoing. Now we are ready for the thesis, which brings us to the third element of a strong introduction, the thesis. And this is the most important sentence in the entire essay, not just in the introduction, the entire essay, because the thesis is the essay. Everything else, the hook, the context, every body paragraph, every piece of evidence, every example, every analysis, all of it exists to support and develop the thesis. So getting the thesis right is not just important, it is fundamental. Let me first tell you what a thesis is not. A thesis is not a fact. A fact cannot be argued. If you write social media is used by billions of people around the world, that is a fact. You cannot write an argumentative essay about whether it is true. It either is or it is not. There is nothing to argue. A thesis is not a topic statement. Social media has many effects on society is a topic statement. It tells us what the essay is about, but it does not take a position. It does not argue anything. A thesis is not a question. Asking a question is interesting, but it is not a claim. A thesis is also not a vague, wishy-washy non-commitment, like social media has both positive and negative effects. That is technically true of almost anything. It is not an argument. A thesis is a clear, specific, arguable claim. It takes a position. It says something that someone else could reasonably disagree with. It makes a commitment. And it usually, especially in academic writing, indicates the reasons or main points that will support that position. Let me show you the difference with examples. Here are 4 statements about social media. Think about which one is the strongest thesis. Number 1. Social media was invented in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Number 2. Social media has both positive and negative effects on young people. Number 3. Social media affects mental health. Number 4. Despite its potential for connection and creativity, social media platforms do net harm to society by fostering addiction, amplifying misinformation, and replacing meaningful human interaction with superficial digital engagement, and they should be subject to far stricter government regulation. Which one is the thesis? Obviously number 4, and let me explain why. Number 1 is a fact. You cannot argue it. Number 2 is vague and takes no real position. Number 3 is a topic, not an argument. It does not say how or in what direction. Number 4 is specific. It takes a clear position. It does net harm. It gives reasons, addiction, misinformation, replacement of real interaction. And it indicates a specific recommended action, stricter regulation. This is the kind of thesis that guides an essay with real clarity and purpose. Now, I want to address something that some students worry about. Is it always necessary to have such a detailed thesis? Does every essay need all the reasons spelled out in the thesis statement? And the answer is, it depends on the type of essay and its length. For a short essay, especially at B2 level or in exam conditions, you do not necessarily need to list all 3 reasons in your thesis. Sometimes a clear 2-part thesis is enough. The structure is, although there are certain benefits, the overall effect of social media on society is harmful and requires regulatory intervention. That is a clear thesis. It acknowledges complexity, it takes a position, and it indicates direction. For longer academic essays, a more detailed thesis with multiple points is expected. But here is the rule that never changes regardless of essay type or length. Your thesis must take a position. It must be arguable. It must be specific enough to actually mean something. If someone reads your thesis and cannot tell what side you are on or what you are arguing, the thesis is not working. Let me give you another practice moment. I am going to give you 3 essay topics. For each one, I want you to write a practice thesis in your head or on paper. Really commit to a position. Do not hedge. Do not say both sides. Pick a side and state your argument clearly. Topic 1. Should university education be free for all citizens? Topic 2. Is working from home better for employee productivity than working in an office? Topic 3. Do children benefit more from learning a second language at a young age or in their teenage years? Go ahead and take a moment to think about these if you would like, and if you feel like it, write them down. Writing them down is always more helpful than just thinking them. Come back when you are ready. Now let us put everything together. We have talked about the hook, the context, and the thesis. Let me now walk you through a complete introduction from start to finish, and I want to narrate my thinking as I write it, so you can see the decisions happening in real time. The essay topic is this: should the school day be extended to include compulsory after-school activities? First, I need a hook. I want something that connects to a real experience, something parents and students can relate to. Let me try an anecdote hook. Here it is. Every afternoon at 3 o'clock, millions of school gates open and children pour out into the streets. Some go to clubs, music lessons, or sports practice. But many, especially in lower-income communities, go home to empty apartments, unlock the door themselves, heat up whatever food is in the fridge, and spend the next 4 hours in front of a screen, alone. For these children, the end of the school day is not the beginning of enrichment. It is the beginning of a long wait until a parent comes home. Now that is a hook with emotional weight. It creates a specific picture. It points toward a real social concern. And it opens up a question in the reader's mind. Is there a better way? Good. Now I need context. The question of what children should do after school has long been a source of debate among educators, parents, and policymakers. Some argue that children need unstructured free time to rest, play, and develop independence. Others point to evidence that structured after-school programs improve academic outcomes, social skills, and emotional well-being, particularly for children from disadvantaged backgrounds. As education systems around the world struggle to address growing inequality and declining student well-being, extending the school day to include organized activities has re-emerged as a serious policy proposal. Notice what I did there. I acknowledge both sides briefly. Not because I am going to argue both sides in the essay, but because good context shows the reader that this is a genuine debate with real complexity. It makes the argument feel grounded. Now the thesis. Although critics argue that children need unstructured time for rest and creative play, extending the school day to include carefully designed, optional after-school activities would reduce educational inequality, improve social development, and provide vital support for working families, making it a reform worth pursuing. Now read that full introduction as one piece. Every afternoon at 3 o'clock, millions of school gates open and children pour out into the streets. Some go to clubs, music lessons, or sports practice, but many, especially in lower-income communities, go home to empty apartments, unlock the door themselves, heat up whatever food is in the fridge, and spend the next 4 hours in front of a screen alone. For these children, the end of the school day is not the beginning of enrichment. It is the beginning of a long wait until a parent comes home. The question of what children should do after school has long been a source of debate among educators, parents, and policymakers. Some argue that children need unstructured free time to rest, play, and develop independence. Others point to evidence that structured after-school programs improve academic outcomes, social skills, and emotional well-being, particularly for children from disadvantaged backgrounds. As education systems around the world struggle to address growing inequality and declining student well-being, extending the school day to include organized activities has re-emerged as a serious policy proposal. Although critics argue that children need unstructured time for rest and creative play, extending the school day to include carefully designed, optional after-school activities would reduce educational inequality, improve social development, and provide vital support for working families, making it a reform worth pursuing. That is a complete, strong introduction. It has a hook that creates emotion and curiosity. It has context that moves from broad to specific. And it has a thesis that takes a clear, arguable position and signals the three main arguments of the essay. If you read that introduction, you know exactly what the essay is going to talk about, and you have a reason to keep reading. That is the goal. Now let me shift gears a little, because I want to spend some time on something that does not get talked about enough when people teach introductions, and that is the question of tone and voice. Because a technically correct introduction and a genuinely compelling introduction are not always the same thing. You can have all three elements, hook, context, thesis, and still write an introduction that feels flat, robotic, or dull. And you can have an introduction that bends the rules slightly but feels alive, human, and genuinely interesting. So let us talk about tone. Tone is the attitude or personality that comes through in your writing. It is shaped by the words you choose, the rhythm of your sentences, the level of formality, and the emotional temperature of what you write. And different types of essays call for different tones. For academic essays in a formal context, the tone should be clear, confident, measured, and objective. You are not trying to be exciting or entertaining. You are trying to be credible and precise. For opinion or argumentative essays, at a less formal level, you can afford a slightly warmer, more engaging tone. You can use contrasting sentence lengths to create rhythm. You can start sentences with words like but, or, and, or, yet, which academic writing often discourages, but which can be very effective in opinion writing. For personal essays, the tone can be deeply personal, reflective, and emotionally honest. The mistake I see most often is students writing in a tone that is much too formal for the occasion, or using very long, convoluted sentences because they think complexity sounds smart. But clarity is not the enemy of intelligence. A sentence that is clear, precise, and well-constructed is far more impressive than a sentence that is long, complicated, and hard to follow. When in doubt, choose clarity. Here's a practical tip about sentence length and rhythm. Good writing mixes short and long sentences. Short sentences create impact. They feel definitive. They land with weight. Longer sentences allow you to develop ideas, add nuance, layer in complexity, and carry the reader through a more elaborate thought. When you use only long sentences, the writing feels exhausting and hard to follow. When you use only short sentences, it feels choppy and robotic. The combination, the variation, is what gives writing its musicality, its energy, its feeling of a real human voice behind the words. Let me give you an example of the same idea written two different ways so you can feel the difference. Version 1. The issue of climate change is an extremely important and pressing concern that affects every single person on the planet in a variety of different ways, including environmental effects, economic effects, and social effects. which is why it is necessary for governments and individuals to take action in order to address this critical situation. Version 2. Climate change is no longer a future threat. It is here, it is accelerating, and its effects are being felt in every corner of the world. From flooded coastlines to record-breaking droughts, from displaced communities to collapsing ecosystems, the evidence is everywhere. The question is no longer whether we are facing a crisis. The question is whether we will respond to it in time. Both versions say similar things, but version 2 is dramatically more effective. It uses short, punchy sentences at the beginning to create impact. It uses a longer sentence in the middle to layer in specific examples. And it ends with a parallel structure. 2 sentences that start with the same phrase and create a rhetorical rhythm. It sounds like a real person with something important to say. Version 1 sounds like someone who learned English by reading textbook examples. Choose version 2 every time. Now I want to talk about something that is closely connected to tone, and that is the concept of knowing your audience. Every good writer thinks about who is reading their work and adjusts their writing accordingly. This does not mean you change your argument depending on what the reader wants to hear. It means you make choices about language, examples, tone, and level of detail based on what will be most effective for your specific reader. For an academic essay at university, your audience is your professor or examiner. They are educated, knowledgeable about the field, and expect precise, evidence-based argumentation. Your tone should be formal and confident. Your examples should be specific and well-sourced. Your thesis should be sophisticated and nuanced. For a high school essay or an English language exam like IELTS or Cambridge B2, your audience is an examiner who is looking for clear communication, correct grammar, coherent structure, and an ability to argue a position logically. They are not necessarily experts in the topic, so you need to explain your ideas clearly without assuming too much prior knowledge. For a personal essay or college application essay, your audience is an admissions officer who is reading hundreds of essays and looking for something genuine, specific, and memorable. They want to hear your real voice. They want to understand who you are as a person, not just what you know. In this case, the most powerful writing is often the most honest. Understanding your audience helps you make better decisions at every stage of writing, but especially in the introduction, because the introduction is where you set the tone for everything that follows. All right, I want to give you a longer, more extended practice now. I'm going to give you 5 different essay topics, and for each one, I'm going to give you a specific audience and a suggested hook type. I want you to try writing a complete introduction in your head, or, even better, on paper, for at least 2 of these 5. Take your time. Do not rush, and remember the 3 elements we have talked about: hook, context, thesis. Topic 1. The essay question is, to what extent does a person's economic background determine their success in life? Audience: a university professor. Suggested hook type: surprising statistic. Topic 2. The essay question is it better to travel and experience the world before going to university or to go straight into higher education after school? Audience: a magazine readership of young adults. Suggested hook type: personal anecdote or short story. Topic 3. The essay question is, should governments invest in space exploration when there are serious problems on Earth that need funding? Audience: a high school examiner. Suggested hook type: bold statement or controversial claim. Topic 4. The essay question is, how has the rise of streaming services changed the way we consume and value art, music, and culture? Audience, a cultural studies class. Suggested hook type, thought-provoking question. Topic 5. The essay question is it ethical for companies to use artificial intelligence to make hiring decisions? Audience, a business school professor. Suggested hook type, relevant quote combined with context. Take your time with those. Come back when you feel ready. Now, I want to take a little detour because I think there is something we should talk about that is not purely about structure, but is absolutely essential to writing good introductions. And that is the relationship between your introduction and the rest of your essay. Here is something that a lot of writing teachers do not tell you clearly enough. Your introduction does not have to be written first. In fact, for many experienced writers, the introduction is often the last thing they write. And there is a very good reason for that. Think about it. Your introduction makes a promise. It says to the reader, here is what this essay is about. Here is the argument I am going to make. Here are the things I am going to show you. But how can you make a promise if you do not yet know exactly what you are going to deliver? If you write your introduction first and then write the essay, you might find that your ideas shift as you write. You might discover a better argument halfway through. You might realize your original thesis was too broad or slightly off point. And then you have to go back and rewrite your introduction to match your actual essay. That is extra work. Many experienced writers start by writing their body paragraphs first. They write out their arguments, their evidence, their analysis. And only once they know exactly what they have argued and how they have argued, do they go back and write the introduction that accurately introduces what they have actually written. This approach produces a much tighter, more coherent introduction because the introduction is based on a real, finished argument rather than a plan that may change. I am not saying you should always do this. Some people need the introduction as a roadmap before they can write the body. If you need that structure to guide your writing, write the introduction first, but then be prepared to revise it once you finish the essay. Check that your introduction accurately reflects the essay you actually wrote, not the essay you plan to write. These can sometimes be very different things. The key point is this: your introduction and your essay must match. The hook must connect logically to the topic. The context must lead directly to the thesis. And the thesis must accurately represent what the body paragraphs actually argue. If there is a mismatch anywhere in that chain, the essay feels disjointed. The reader notices even if they cannot exactly explain why. Let me give you a very quick exercise for this concept. I am going to read you two versions of a thesis statement and then tell you what the body paragraphs actually argue. You tell me which version matches the body paragraphs. The essay is about whether fast food should be taxed more heavily. Body paragraphs argue that heavy taxation on fast food has successfully reduced consumption in several countries, that the revenue generated could fund public health programs, and that critics' concerns about unfairness to low-income populations can be addressed through targeted rebate schemes. Thesis Version A. The fast food industry is a major contributor to the global obesity crisis, and something must be done to address this serious public health problem. Thesis Version B. Taxing fast food at a higher rate is not only an effective strategy for reducing unhealthy consumption, but also a viable funding mechanism for public health programs, and concerns about economic fairness can be mitigated through thoughtful policy design. Which thesis matches the body paragraphs? Clearly, version B. Version A is vague and does not indicate the specific arguments being made. It says something must be done but does not say what. Version B directly matches the three arguments of the body paragraphs. That alignment, that match between the promise and the delivery, is what makes an essay feel coherent and well-written. Now let us talk about some common mistakes that students make in introductions, because knowing what to avoid is just as important as knowing what to do. I am going to go through the most frequent ones, the ones I see again and again, and explain why each one is a problem. The first common mistake is starting with a dictionary definition. You've probably seen this approach. The essay begins with, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, the word justice means the quality of being fair and reasonable. This approach is almost universally seen as weak in academic and formal writing. There are a few reasons for this. First, it is extremely overused. Examiners and professors have read this kind of opening so many times that it immediately signals a lack of originality. Second, it is usually unnecessary. If you are writing about justice, you do not need to tell your reader what justice means. They know what the word means. What they want to know is what you think about it and what you are going to argue. Third, it delays your actual engagement with the topic. You are spending valuable words on something that adds nothing. The only exception to this is if the definition itself is genuinely central to your argument. For example, if you are writing an essay about whether a particular situation counts as discrimination, and your entire argument hinges on the exact definition of discrimination, then yes, engaging with the definition makes sense. But even then, you would not open with a dictionary quote. You would discuss the definition in a more nuanced way and connect it directly to your argument. The second common mistake is apologizing or hedging at the start of the essay. This sounds like, in this essay, I will try to discuss some of the reasons why. Or, this is quite a complex topic and there are many different opinions. Or, I am going to talk about both sides of the argument. These kinds of openings are weak because they signal uncertainty and lack of confidence. They tell the reader that you are not sure you have anything interesting to say. A strong introduction does not apologize for itself. It begins with confidence and authority. Now, confidence does not mean arrogance. You can write with confidence and still acknowledge complexity. But there is a big difference between acknowledging complexity, which shows intellectual maturity, and hedging because you are afraid to commit, which shows a lack of direction. Compare these two. Weak. Climate change is a very complicated topic with many different views, and I will try to discuss some of the main ones in this essay. Strong. Climate change is the defining environmental challenge of the 21st century, and the debate is no longer about whether human activity is causing it. The debate is about how fast we can act and whether our political systems are capable of responding with the urgency the situation demands. Both acknowledge complexity, but the second one is confident. It knows what it wants to say. It commits to a framing. It is worth reading. The third common mistake is including too much detail about what the essay is going to do, rather than just doing it. This is sometimes called signposting, and a little bit of signposting is fine and expected in academic writing. But too much of it is annoying and wastes space. Here is what I mean. Weak version. This essay will first provide background information about social media. Then it will discuss the positive effects. Then it will discuss the negative effects. Finally, it will present a conclusion about whether social media is beneficial or harmful to society. That is a table of contents, not an introduction. It gives a bureaucratic list of what the essay will do without actually engaging with any of the ideas. The reader learns nothing from reading that except roughly how many paragraphs the essay has. Strong version. Social media has reshaped human connection at a scale no previous technology has achieved, but its costs, rising anxiety, proliferating misinformation, and a diminishing attention span suggest that the bargain we struck with Silicon Valley may not have been worth the price. This essay argues that the net effect of social media platforms on human well-being is negative, and that without significant structural reform, those effects will only worsen. That version tells us the topic, establishes the tension, and gives us the argument. It does this in 2 sentences without listing what each paragraph is going to say. The reader is oriented and engaged. That is the goal. The 4th common mistake is writing an introduction that is far too long. This is extremely common in students who are writing longer essays for the first time. They feel that since the essay is long, the introduction should also be long. But that is not how it works. A general guideline in most academic writing is that the introduction should be roughly 10 to 15% of the total word count. So for a 1,000-word essay, your introduction should be about 100 to 150 words. For a 2,000-word essay, about 200 to 300 words. For a 5,000-word essay, perhaps 400 to 500 words. If your introduction is running much longer than that, you are probably including information that belongs in the body paragraphs. The 5th common mistake is writing an introduction that does not connect to the actual content of the essay. The introduction makes promises that the essay does not keep. The hook is about one thing, the thesis is about another, and the body paragraphs are about a third. This disconnect usually happens when the student wrote the introduction first, then changed direction while writing the essay, and forgot to go back and revise the introduction. Always check the connection between your introduction and your body paragraphs before you submit. Now, I want to do something a little different. I want to give you a series of weak introductions and practice correcting them. I will read you each weak introduction, explain what is wrong with it, and then show you a stronger version. This kind of comparative analysis, seeing the weak version next to the strong version and understanding why the strong version is better, is one of the most effective ways to improve your own writing. Weak introduction. Number 1. Essay topic. Should animals be used in medical research? In this essay, I am going to write about animal testing. Animal testing is when scientists use animals to test medicines and treatments. There are many arguments for and against animal testing. Some people think it is necessary, and some people think it is cruel. I will discuss both sides of this important issue. What is wrong with this? Where do we begin? Opening is the most generic possible statement of what the essay is about. There is no hook. There is no engagement. The context sentences are repetitive and add nothing. There is no thesis. The essay does not take any position. It just says it will discuss both sides, which means the writer has not committed to an argument at all. This is the kind of introduction that makes a reader sigh. Here is a stronger version. Every year, approximately 115 million animals are used in laboratory experiments worldwide. Behind those numbers are living creatures that feel pain, experience fear, and die in the service of human medical progress. Whether that exchange is morally justified is one of the most difficult ethical questions in modern science. This essay argues that while animal research has produced genuine medical breakthroughs, advances in computational modeling, organoids, and cell culture technology now make it both scientifically unnecessary and ethically indefensible to continue relying on animal models as the primary tool in preclinical research. That version has a specific arresting statistic as the hook. It follows with emotionally resonant context, and it ends with a nuanced thesis that acknowledges complexity while taking a clear position. That is a C-grade paper turned into a potential A in the introduction alone. Weak introduction number 2. Essay topic: Is fast food bad for society? According to the Oxford English Dictionary, the word fast food means food that can be prepared quickly and easily and is sold in restaurants and snack bars as a quick meal or to be taken away. Fast food is eaten by millions of people around the world. In this essay, I will discuss the effects of fast food on society. What is wrong here? Dictionary definition opening: weak and overused. The context sentence is almost a tautology, telling us that fast food is eaten by people. And the thesis is not a thesis at all. It is a description of what the essay will do, not an argument it will make. Here is a stronger version. In 2023, the global fast food industry generated revenues of over $700 billion, making it one of the largest and fastest growing sectors of the global economy. This is not just a story about burgers and fries. It is a story about health, about inequality, about the relationship between corporate profit and public well-being, and about the choices societies make when convenience is prioritized above nutrition. This essay argues that the proliferation of fast food has contributed significantly to rising rates of obesity, dietary illness, and health inequality, and that addressing these problems requires not just individual choice, but systemic policy intervention. See the difference? Same topic, completely different quality of engagement. Let me give you one more weak introduction to analyze. Essay topic: How does music affect mental health? Music is something that many people enjoy. People listen to music when they are happy, sad, or need motivation. Research shows that music can affect people's feelings and emotions. This essay will look at the ways in which music affects mental health in positive and negative ways. Problems here. The opening sentence is completely generic. The context sentences state things that every reader already knows. And the thesis, if we can call it that, takes no position and commits to nothing. It just says, the essay will look at positive and negative effects, which tells us nothing. Stronger version: There is a moment familiar to almost anyone who has ever been through grief, heartbreak, or deep loneliness when a piece of music cuts through everything and says exactly what words cannot. That is not coincidence. Decades of neurological research have revealed that music activates some of the most primitive and emotionally powerful structures in the human brain, triggering the release of dopamine, reducing cortisol, and even influencing heart rate and breathing. This essay argues that music is not merely entertainment, but a legitimate therapeutic tool. One that, if properly integrated into mental health care systems, could offer accessible, low-cost support for millions of people living with anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. That is 1,000 times better. The anecdote hook is specific and emotionally resonant. The context establishes scientific credibility without being dry. And the thesis makes a specific, forward-looking argument about music as a therapeutic tool. I want to spend a little time now on something very specific to exam-style introductions, because many of you watching this are preparing for language exams like IELTS, Cambridge B2, or C1, or TOEFL. And there are some particular things to be aware of when writing introductions in an exam context. First, time management. In an exam, you have a limited amount of time. You cannot spend 20 minutes perfecting your introduction. A general guideline for a 45-minute essay task is to spend about 5 to 7 minutes on your introduction. That is enough time to write a solid hook, 2 or 3 context sentences, and a clear thesis. Do not overthink it. Get the 3 elements in, make sure they connect, and move on. Second, in exams, especially for IELTS Task 2 or Cambridge B2 essays, there's a very common and effective template that works well within the time constraints. It goes like this. Paraphrase the essay question in your own words to introduce the topic. Add 1 or 2 sentences of context or background. State your thesis clearly. That is it. You do not need an elaborate anecdote hook in an exam context, although a brief and relevant one can certainly elevate your score. The most important thing in an exam is clarity, coherence, and having a thesis that the body of your essay actually argues. Third, avoid copying the language of the question directly into your introduction. This is a very common mistake, and it actually lowers your score in most English exams because examiners are looking for evidence that you can use a range of vocabulary and express ideas in your own words. If the question says, "Some people believe that the internet has done more harm than good," do not start your introduction with, "The internet has done more harm than good." Paraphrase it. Say something like, "The internet's influence on modern life has sparked debate about whether its overall impact is positive or negative." Or, as digital technology becomes increasingly central to daily life, questions about whether the internet is ultimately beneficial or detrimental to society have intensified. Fourth, be careful about the length of your introduction relative to your word count target. In a 250-word essay, your introduction should be no longer than about 60 to 70 words. If your introduction is 100 words in a 250-word essay, your body paragraphs and conclusion are going to be too short to develop your argument properly. Let me now do a full exam-style practice together. I am going to give you an IELTS-style Task 2 question, and I am going to write an introduction for it as if I were taking the exam with a limited time frame. The question is, some people think that governments should invest more money in public transportation rather than building new roads. To what extent do you agree? Here is my exam-style introduction. As urban populations grow and concerns about carbon emissions intensify, the debate over whether governments should prioritize public transportation investment over road construction has become increasingly relevant to policymakers around the world. While there are situations in which expanding road infrastructure is necessary, particularly in less developed regions where basic connectivity is lacking, this essay argues that in most contexts, investing in robust public transportation networks is the superior approach, as it reduces congestion, lowers environmental impact, and promotes more equitable access to mobility. That introduction is clear. It is appropriately formal in tone. It paraphrases the question without copying it. It briefly acknowledges the counter-argument. And it ends with a specific and arguable thesis that signals 3 supporting reasons. It is also about 75 words, which is appropriate for an essay that will be around 250 to 280 words total. That is a solid exam introduction. Now, I want to talk about something that sometimes gets overlooked in discussions of introductions, and that is revision, the ability to look at what you have written and make it better, because very few people write perfect introductions on the first try. Most good introductions are rewritten at least once, sometimes many times. Here is a simple revision checklist that you can apply to any introduction you write. Go through these questions every time you finish an introduction before you submit. Does the hook actually hook? Imagine you are the reader, encountering this text for the first time. Does that opening line make you want to keep reading? Does it create curiosity, emotion, or surprise? If the honest answer is no, or not really, rewrite it. Does the context move logically from broad to specific? Does each sentence build toward the thesis? Or does the context jump around or include irrelevant information? Is the thesis a real thesis? Does it take a clear, arguable position? Is it specific enough to actually mean something? Does it indicate what the essay is going to argue? Does the introduction match the essay? After you have written the body paragraphs, come back and check. Does your thesis accurately represent the argument you actually made? Does the context set up the right framing? Is the tone appropriate for the audience and purpose? Is it too formal, too casual? Does it sound like a real person writing with purpose? Or does it sound robotic and template-driven? Is the length appropriate? Is it taking up too much of the total word count, leaving not enough space for the body paragraphs? Run your introduction through those 6 questions, and you will catch most of the significant problems before they cost you marks or credibility. I want to give you one final extended exercise before we wrap up today's session. I am going to give you a complete essay prompt, and I want you to write a full introduction, from hook to thesis, either in your head or on paper. Take as long as you need. I will give you some guiding questions to help you think through each element. The essay prompt is: in many countries, the number of people choosing to live alone has increased significantly in recent decades. What are the reasons for this trend, and is it a positive or negative development? This is a 2-part question, reasons and evaluation. That means your introduction needs to acknowledge both parts. Your thesis needs to say something about what the main reasons are and whether you think this is a positive or negative development or a mix of both. Guiding questions to help you plan your introduction. What is a surprising, specific, or interesting fact about solo living that could work as a hook? What broad context can you give about the trend of living alone? How can you narrow that context down to the specific question of reasons and evaluation? What is your position? Do you think this trend is mostly positive, mostly negative, or genuinely complex? And what will your thesis look like if you commit to that position? Take your time. Write the introduction. When you are done, ask yourself the revision questions I just gave you. Would you change anything? I hope this session has been genuinely useful for you, not just as a set of rules to memorize, but as a real understanding of what introductions are for, why they work the way they do, and how you can write them with confidence and purpose. Let me do a quick summary of everything we have covered today, because there was a lot and it helps to hear the key ideas one more time. We talked about what an introduction actually does. It builds a bridge from the reader's world to the specific conversation of the essay. It does three things: catches attention, gives context, and signals direction through the thesis. We talked about 5 types of hooks and why they work: surprising facts or statistics, anecdotes, thought-provoking questions, bold statements, and relevant quotes. We talked about context sentences and how they should move like a funnel from broad to specific, orienting the reader without arguing the case before the thesis. We spent a lot of time on the thesis, why it must be arguable, specific, and position-taking, and how it sets up the entire argument of the essay. We talked about tone, voice, sentence rhythm, and the importance of writing like a real person rather than a textbook template. We talked about knowing your audience and adjusting your writing accordingly. We discussed the relationship between the introduction and the rest of the essay and why you should always check that they match. We went through 5 common mistakes: dictionary definitions, apologetic openings, excessive signposting, introductions that are too long, and introductions that do not match the essay. We analyzed weak introductions and rewrote them into strong ones. We talked about exam-specific strategies for writing introductions quickly and effectively, and we ended with a revision checklist and a final practice prompt. That is a lot, and if some of it is still not fully clear yet, that is completely okay. This is the kind of skill that develops through practice, not just through understanding. Every essay you write is a chance to practice this. Every introduction you draft, revise, and improve is a step forward. Do not wait for perfect conditions. Do not wait until you feel ready. Start writing introductions, even imperfect ones, and keep refining them. You are watching this channel because you want to grow in English, and that is exactly the right attitude. Learning a language is not a straight line. It curves, it doubles back, it surprises you. There are days when everything clicks and days when nothing does. But every day you practice, something is building inside you that you cannot always see yet, but is absolutely real. So before I let you go today, I want to give you one final piece of advice about essay introductions that might be the most important thing I have said in this entire session. And it is this: the best introduction you will ever write is the one that sounds like you. Not like a textbook, not like a template, not like what you think an essay is supposed to sound like. The best introduction has your thinking in it, your questions, your way of seeing the problem, your specific choice of words. That is what makes writing worth reading, not the adherence to a formula, but the presence of a real mind engaging honestly with an idea. Write more, revise more, read more, and come back next time, because we have got more good things coming for you. I am Jessica. This is English in Advance, and I will see you in the next episode. Take care. Oh, wait, before you go, I always forget to do this at the end, but it genuinely matters. If this episode helped you, please leave a comment below. Tell me which part was most useful. Was it the hook types, the thesis explanation, the weak to strong introduction examples, or was there something that was still confusing that you would like me to explain in a future episode? Your comments shape what I make next, and I read every single one. So take 30 seconds and leave a thought. It helps me, and it helps other learners who see your comment and realize they are not alone in finding this stuff challenging. And if you know someone who is preparing for a B2 exam or working on their essay writing skills, share this video with them. It is one of the best things you can do for someone you care about. Okay, now I am really saying goodbye. See you next time. Bye. Actually, you know what? Let me come back one more time because there is so much more I want to share with you today. I realize we talked about the structure and the mechanics, but there is a whole dimension of writing introductions that I have not fully explored with you yet. And it would be a disservice to you to leave without going there. So grab a coffee or tea, get comfortable, because we are going to keep going. And trust me, this next part is where the real transformation happens. I want to talk about something I think of as the invisible architecture of a great introduction. We have covered the visible parts, the hook, the context, the thesis. But there is something else that makes a truly exceptional introduction different from a merely correct one, and that something is the emotional and intellectual journey it takes the reader on. A great introduction does not just convey information, it moves the reader from one mental state to another. Let me explain what I mean. When a reader starts an essay, they are in a neutral state. They have some vague expectation, maybe a question they want answered, maybe a topic they are curious about. The introduction's job, the hidden job that nobody really talks about, is to move them from that neutral state to a state of genuine engagement. Genuine engagement means they care about the answer. They are curious about where the argument is going. They feel that reading this essay is worth their time and attention. How do you create genuine engagement? There are 3 emotional moves that the best introductions make, sometimes explicitly, sometimes very subtly. The first emotional move is creating a sense of stakes. Stakes means the reader understands why this topic matters. Why should they care? What is at risk? What changes if we get this right or wrong? Great writers always answer this question somewhere in their introduction, even if they never use those exact words. When you read the introduction about social media and the statistic about how much time teenagers spend on their phones, you feel the stakes. This is not an abstract debate. This is something that is happening right now, in real families with real consequences. That feeling of urgency is the sense of stakes being established. To create stakes in your introduction, ask yourself this question: what actually happens in the real world because of this issue? Who gets hurt? Who benefits? What is lost? What is gained? What could be different? Then find a way to bring that real-world consequence into your introduction. Not in a melodramatic way, not by saying, this is the most important issue ever, but by being specific, by naming a real person, a real number, a real situation. Specificity is what creates stakes. Vagueness destroys them. The second emotional move is creating a sense of tension. Tension in writing is created when there are 2 things that seem to be in conflict, when there are opposing forces, when something is unresolved, when there is a question that does not have a simple answer. Good introductions often create tension because tension is what drives curiosity. It makes the reader want to know how the tension resolves. Think about the introduction we wrote together about extending the school day. There was a tension in it. On one side, children need unstructured time. On the other side, many children spend that time isolated and unsupported. That tension is real, and it does not have an obvious resolution. It requires thought and argument to navigate. And that is exactly why it works. The reader is drawn in because they want to see how you are going to resolve it. You can create tension in your introduction in several ways. You can present a paradox, two things that seem to be true but seem contradictory. You can describe a situation that is widely accepted but problematic. You can show the gap between what we say we value and what we actually do. Or you can present a question that is genuinely difficult to answer, where reasonable, intelligent people disagree. Any of these creates tension, and tension creates curiosity, and curiosity keeps people reading. The third emotional move is creating trust. This sounds a bit abstract, but bear with me. When a reader encounters a new essay, they are making a rapid, unconscious judgment about whether this writer knows what they are talking about and whether they are worth listening to. If the introduction feels sloppy, vague, or generic, the reader loses trust immediately. Even if they keep reading, they are skeptical. They are half expecting to be disappointed. But if the introduction is precise, specific, confident, and clearly the product of genuine thought, the reader trusts you. They lean in. They give you the benefit of the doubt when you make a complex argument. They follow you even into difficult territory because you have demonstrated in those first few sentences that you know what you are doing. Trust is built through precision, through specificity, through writing that sounds like a real person thinking carefully rather than a student trying to fill a word count. Every vague phrase you remove, every generic opening you replace with something specific, every unnecessary word you cut, every time you choose the more precise word over the more impressive sounding but less meaningful one, you are building trust with your reader. And that trust is one of the most valuable things you can earn in the opening paragraph of an essay. Now I want to do something practical with these three concepts: stakes, tension, and trust. Let me take a weak introduction and rebuild it deliberately with these three elements in mind. And I will narrate each step of the process so you can see exactly how I am thinking. The essay topic is, should schools teach students about personal finance and money management? Here is a weak version. Personal finance is an important topic. Many people do not have enough knowledge about money. Schools should teach students about personal finance so that they can manage their money better in the future. This essay will discuss why personal finance education in schools is important. No stakes, no tension, no trust. Let me rebuild it. First, stakes. What is actually at stake here? What happens in the real world because of financial illiteracy? Let me get specific. In the United Kingdom, for example, over 8 million adults regularly run out of money before the end of the month. In the United States, the average household credit card debt is close to $10,000, and surveys consistently find that a significant portion of adults in wealthy countries cannot explain the difference between a simple interest rate and a compound one. The cost of financial illiteracy is not abstract. It is foreclosed homes, accumulated debt, retirement savings that do not exist, and families making decisions about their money based on fear or guesswork rather than understanding. That is the stake. Now, tension. Is there a genuine tension in this debate? Of course. There is an argument that school curriculum is already overcrowded, that there are more urgent subjects, that financial education should be the responsibility of parents, not schools, and there is the counter-argument that many parents are themselves financially illiterate, and that leaving this education to chance perpetuates inequality in a very direct way. Children from financially literate families grow up to be financially literate. Children from financially struggling families often do not. The school is the one equalizing institution that can break that cycle. There is genuine tension there. Now, trust. Trust comes from precision and specificity, so I need to use specific numbers and specific, well-articulated claims rather than vague generalities. Let me put it all together now. Here is the strong version of the introduction. In the United Kingdom, over 8 million adults regularly exhaust their monthly income before the month ends. In the United States, households carry an average of $10,000 in credit card debt, and surveys regularly reveal that large portions of the adult population cannot explain how compound interest works. These are not the statistics of an education system that is teaching its young people what they need to know about money. Despite living in economies built on financial decisions, from mortgages to investments to pension contributions, the vast majority of students leave school with no formal instruction in how any of it works. Critics of financial education in schools argue that the curriculum is already overcrowded and that money management is better taught at home. But this argument assumes every home has an informed teacher, which data does not support. This essay argues that incorporating financial literacy into the compulsory school curriculum is not a luxury but an urgent educational reform, one that would reduce economic inequality, empower individuals across income levels, and equip young people for a financial world that is only growing more complex. Now, that is a different essay entirely. It has stakes, it has tension, it builds trust through specificity. The reader knows exactly what they are getting into, why it matters, and what position the essay is going to take. That is the difference between writing that informs and writing that engages. Let me now do a deeper exploration of the hook specifically, because I want to give you more examples, more variety, more of the actual thinking that goes into selecting and writing an effective hook for different topics. We talked about 5 types earlier. I want to go further. I want to show you how the same topic can be hooked in completely different ways and how to choose which approach fits best. The topic is the impact of urbanization on human well-being. Hook approach 1. The unexpected statistic. For the first time in human history, more than half the world's population lives in cities. As recently as 1950, that number was less than 30%. In the space of a single lifetime, human civilization has shifted from a predominantly rural existence to one centered on concrete, glass, and the constant noise of urban density. That shift has changed everything, including, research increasingly suggests, how happy we are. Hook approach 2. The sensory anecdote. On a Tuesday morning in Dhaka, the city is already moving at full speed by 6 o'clock. The streets fill with rickshaws, buses, and pedestrians. Fruit sellers arrange their stalls. Children in school uniforms navigate pavements crowded with commuters. The energy is extraordinary. But ask the people living in those apartments stacked 12 stories high how often they speak to their neighbors, how often they walk somewhere green, how often they feel genuinely known in the place they call home, and the answers tell a more complicated story. Hook approach 3. The question. What does a city do to a person? Not to their career prospects or their access to services, though those matter enormously, but to their inner life, to their sense of belonging, their experience of loneliness, their relationship with time and nature and silence. These are not questions that urban planners typically ask. Perhaps it is time they started. Hook approach 4. The bold claim. Cities are one of humanity's greatest achievements and one of its least well-designed experiments in human well-being. We built them for commerce, for industry, for density and efficiency. We largely forgot to build them for happiness. Hook approach 5. The quote combined with immediate subversion. Aristotle said that people come to the city to live and stay to live well. But 2,500 years after that observation, the data on urban happiness, loneliness, anxiety, and mental health suggests that Aristotle may have been optimistic. 5 completely different openings, same topic. All of them work in different ways for different tones, different audiences, different contexts. The sensory anecdote works beautifully for a personal or reflective essay. The statistic is perfect for an academic paper. The bold claim is ideal for opinion writing. The question works well for a piece aimed at general readers who may not have strong prior knowledge of the debate. And the subverted quote works especially well when you want to acknowledge a long intellectual history and then immediately challenge it. Which one should you use for a given essay? The answer depends on 4 things. Your audience, as we discussed, the tone and register of the essay, the specific argument you are going to make, and honestly, which one feels most natural to you as a writer in this moment? Sometimes you try one approach and it just clicks. Sometimes you try 3 before you find the one that feels right. That is normal. That is writing. Now let me talk about something that is particularly important for B2 level learners specifically. And that is the relationship between vocabulary and confidence in introductions. One of the biggest mistakes I see at the B2 level is students trying to use vocabulary that is too advanced for them, vocabulary they are not confident with, vocabulary they have looked up in a thesaurus but do not fully know how to use. This often backfires in 2 ways. First, it produces errors. Words that are similar in meaning are rarely interchangeable in all contexts. Using a synonym incorrectly does not make you sound more advanced. It makes you sound confused. A B2 student who uses the word utilization instead of use because it sounds more sophisticated, but uses it in a context where use is the right choice and utilization is awkward and unnecessarily formal, is actually demonstrating lower language competence, not higher. Second, it makes the writing feel unnatural and robotic. When you are reaching for words you do not quite own yet, the writing loses its flow. It becomes stiff. It loses the quality of a real voice. And that natural, real voice quality is actually something examiners reward highly, because it is hard to fake. The best advice I can give you about vocabulary and introductions is this. Use the words you are confident with, and use them well. Use precise, well-chosen words at your actual level of mastery, rather than vague approximations of words that are above your current level. Clarity and precision, with words you know, will always serve you better than vague or incorrect use of words you are still learning. That said, your introductions are a great opportunity to practice using the vocabulary you are working to acquire. You do not have to avoid challenge, but be strategic. If you are going to try a more advanced word, make sure you have seen it used in context, that you understand its full meaning, its connotations, the kinds of sentences it appears in, and whether it fits the register of your essay. Do not just swap a simple word for a fancy one without this understanding. Let me give you an exercise around vocabulary now. I am going to give you a weak introduction with very basic vocabulary, and I want you to think about where and how you could upgrade the vocabulary while keeping it natural and accurate. Here is the weak introduction. Climate change is a big problem. It is affecting the whole world. Many countries are trying to do something about it. Some countries are doing well and some countries are not doing well. The situation is serious and we need to act fast. That is extremely basic. But instead of just telling you to use more advanced words, I want you to think about this at the level of ideas first. The vocabulary problem here is actually a consequence of the idea problem. The sentences are vague because the ideas are vague. What kind of problem is climate change? What is affecting the world in what specific way? Which countries are trying to do what specifically? What does doing well mean exactly? Let me rewrite this with more precise ideas and watch how the vocabulary naturally elevates as the ideas become more specific. The concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has now exceeded 420 parts per million, the highest level in 3 million years. That number is not a projection or a worst-case scenario. It is the current reality, measured daily. Some governments have responded with ambitious decarbonization commitments, ranging from carbon pricing mechanisms to legally binding net zero targets. But the gap between these commitments and actual emissions reductions remains vast, and the window for avoiding the most catastrophic consequences of unchecked warming is narrowing with every year of insufficient action. Do you see what happened? The ideas got more specific and the vocabulary followed naturally. Parts per million, decarbonization, carbon pricing, net zero targets. These are not fancy words chosen to impress. They are the precise words for the precise concepts being discussed. Specificity of thought produces precision of language. That is the key insight. Improve your ideas and your vocabulary will improve with them. Let me now explore something that I think is particularly useful for anyone writing in a second or foreign language. And that is the concept of sentence variety and structural confidence in introductions. One of the things that makes native writers' introductions feel natural and readable is that they use a wide variety of sentence structures. They do not just write subject, verb, object in the same pattern over and over. They use subordinate clauses, participial phrases, inversions, conditional structures, passive voice where appropriate, short declarative statements, and longer, more complex architectures. This variety creates rhythm and energy. It makes the prose feel alive. As a B2 learner, you have access to most of these structures, but many students do not use them in their writing because they are nervous about making grammatical errors. They stick to the simple, safe structures they are most confident with, even though they know more complex ones are possible. This caution is understandable, but it limits your writing significantly. Let me walk you through some specific structural moves that can elevate your introductions at the B2 level and above. The first is the concessive clause. A concessive clause is one that acknowledges a counter-argument or an opposing point before the main claim. It usually starts with words like although, even though, while, despite, or in spite of. Using concessive clauses in your thesis or in your context sentences shows intellectual maturity. It says, I am aware that this is complex. I have considered the other side, and having considered it, I still maintain my position. For example, instead of writing, social media is harmful and should be regulated, you can write, although social media has created genuine opportunities for connection and democratic participation, the evidence increasingly suggests that without meaningful regulation, its harms to mental health and social cohesion significantly outweigh its benefits. See the difference? The second version acknowledges complexity. It is a more honest and more sophisticated representation of the issue, and it uses a grammatical structure, the concessive clause with although, that immediately elevates the register. The second structural move is the fronted adverbial. This means putting an adverbial phrase or clause at the beginning of a sentence, rather than at the end where it would normally go. This creates variety and often creates emphasis. For example, instead of writing, the debate over immigration policy has intensified in recent years, you might write, in recent years, the debate over immigration policy has intensified considerably. As economic pressures, geopolitical instability, and shifting demographic patterns have converged to reshape the landscape of national identity across the Western world. The fronted adverbial in recent years creates a temporal anchor for the reader before the main claim arrives. It also allows you to build up the sentence with more detail and context. The third structural move is the rhetorical fragment. A fragment is a sentence that is grammatically incomplete. It is technically a grammar error in formal academic writing. But in opinion writing, personal essays, and less formal contexts, fragments used deliberately for effect can be very powerful. They create impact, they land hard, they emphasize. For example, every year thousands of young people leave school unable to read above a primary level. This is not a developing world problem. This is happening in some of the wealthiest countries on earth, in countries with compulsory education, in countries that have been spending increasing sums on their school systems for decades. The question is not whether we have the resources to fix this. The question is whether we have the will. In countries with compulsory education and in countries that have been spending increasing sums are technically fragments, but they are clearly deliberate. They create a staccato rhythm that makes the point land with force. Used sparingly and correctly, this kind of structural choice is very effective. Now I want to spend some time on a question that comes up often with students writing introductions, and that is, how personal should an introduction be? Should you use I? Should you share your own experience? Is it appropriate to express emotion? And the answer, as with most things in writing, depends on context. In formal academic writing at university level, using I and personal experience is generally discouraged or limited. The convention is to write in a way that appears objective and evidence-based. This does not mean you do not have a perspective. Your thesis is your perspective. Your argument is your perspective. but the convention is to present that perspective through evidence and reasoning rather than through personal testimony. I think, or in my opinion, are phrases that academic writing tends to avoid in favor of constructions like the evidence suggests, or it is arguable that. In personal essays, narrative essays, or reflective pieces, the I is not just acceptable, it is essential. The reader wants to know what you think, what you experienced, how this topic connects to your actual life. Excluding yourself from this kind of essay would make it impersonal and hollow. In exam writing at B2 or C1 level, the convention usually sits somewhere in the middle. You can use I in IELTS, for example, for opinion essays, saying, "in my view" or "I believe" is perfectly standard and expected, but it should be used to state your position, not to ramble about your personal experiences in a way that is not relevant to the argument. The most important thing to understand is that the presence or absence of I does not determine whether writing feels personal or human. You can write entirely in the third person and still have writing that feels deeply human, thoughtful, and present. It comes down to the specificity of the thinking, the quality of the word choices, and the evidence that a real mind is engaging genuinely with the ideas. That is what makes writing feel human. Here is something I want you to do right now if you are serious about improving your essay introductions. I want you to find 3 essays or opinion articles that you think are well written. They can be in English or in your native language. Read just the first paragraphs, and then ask yourself these questions about each one. What type of hook did this writer choose? Why do you think they chose that type? What are the context sentences doing? How do they move from the hook to the thesis? What is the thesis and what makes it work? And what is the tone and how does the writer create that tone through their word choices and sentence structures? This kind of close reading is one of the most powerful things you can do to improve your own writing. You are essentially reverse engineering good writing. You are looking at the finished product and working backward to understand the decisions. And over time, you internalize those decisions. You start making them naturally in your own writing without having to consciously think about each one. Reading widely in the language you are writing in is not just helpful, it is essential. It is where your ear for good writing comes from. It is where your vocabulary expands. It is where you develop a feel for what sounds right and what sounds off. So read. Read essays, read opinion pieces, read long-form journalism. Read things you agree with and things you disagree with. Read about topics you know well and topics you know nothing about. Read for pleasure and read analytically. Just read. Now I want to do one final deep dive into a specific type of introduction that deserves its own extended treatment. And that is the introduction for a discursive or balanced essay, sometimes called a discussion essay. This is a type that appears frequently in Cambridge exams and in many academic contexts. And it has its own particular challenges when it comes to the introduction. A discursive essay, unlike a purely argumentative one, does not take a strong single-sided position from the outset. Instead, it discusses multiple perspectives, presents arguments from different angles, and may reach a nuanced conclusion that acknowledges the validity of more than one viewpoint. Examples of discursive essay questions sound like this. Discuss the advantages and disadvantages of living in a big city. Or, some people believe that technology is making us less creative. Others disagree. Discuss both views and give your own opinion. Or, to what extent do you agree that standardized testing does more harm than good in education systems? The introduction for a discursive essay needs to do something slightly different from the purely argumentative introduction we've been practicing. Rather than launching directly into a strong, one-sided thesis, the introduction needs to acknowledge the debate, introduce both or multiple sides briefly, and then indicate whether the essay will ultimately take a position or simply explore the issue. Let me show you the difference. Here is an argumentative introduction thesis. Standardized testing is fundamentally counterproductive in education and should be phased out entirely in favor of portfolio-based assessment. And here is a discursive introduction thesis. While standardized testing offers certain advantages in terms of comparability and accountability, the significant harms it poses to creative thinking, student well-being, and educational equity suggests that its role in education systems needs to be substantially rethought. Do you see the difference? The argumentative thesis is bold and one-sided. The discursive thesis acknowledges both sides, but still takes a nuanced position, which is that the harms outweigh the advantages. It does not just say there are pros and cons, and I will discuss them. That would be too vague. But it also does not pretend there are no advantages to the system it is ultimately critiquing. For the discursive essay, the context sentences become especially important because they need to establish both sides of the debate briefly before the thesis arrives. A simple structure for this is, first, acknowledge the phenomenon or trend being discussed. Second, introduce the case for one side. Third, introduce the case for the other side. Fourth, state your nuanced thesis. Let me write a complete discursive introduction as an example. Essay question. Some people believe that children should have homework every night. Others think that homework causes unnecessary stress and should be abolished. Discuss both views and give your own opinion. Hook. A 2023 international study of over 15,000 students found something surprising. The countries where students do the most homework, often exceeding 3 to 4 hours per night, do not consistently outperform those where homework is minimal or even absent. Finland, which consistently ranks among the world's top education systems, assigns some of the lowest homework loads in the developed world. Context: few debates in education are more persistent or more emotionally charged than the question of homework. Proponents argue that regular homework reinforces classroom learning, builds discipline, and prepares children for the demands of higher education. Critics, meanwhile, point to a growing body of research suggesting that excessive homework increases anxiety, reduces sleep quality, and, for younger children in particular, may actively undermine learning rather than support it. Thesis. While homework, when well designed and appropriately assigned, can reinforce learning, the evidence suggests that many schools overuse it without clear educational justification, causing significant harm to student well-being, and that a more thoughtful, evidence-based approach to homework policy is urgently needed. That is a complete discursive introduction. The hook uses a surprising statistic to immediately establish that the debate is not as obvious as it might seem. The context presents both sides fairly, and the thesis takes a nuanced position, not for or against homework in absolute terms, but arguing that the current practice is poorly calibrated and needs rethinking based on evidence. That is the kind of thesis that opens up a genuinely interesting discussion rather than a predictable one. Let me also say something about essay questions that begin with, "To what extent?" These are particularly common in Cambridge exams, and they are a type that confuses many students. What is "to what extent" actually asking? It is asking you to evaluate a claim, not just whether you agree or disagree, but how much you agree or disagree and under what conditions or with what qualifications. The key mistake students make with "to what extent" questions is treating them as a yes or no question. They write a thesis that says "I fully agree" or "I completely disagree," and the essay loses the nuance that the question is designed to elicit. To what extent is an invitation to think carefully about the conditions under which a claim is true or false, the degree to which it is true, the exceptions, the qualifications, and the context dependence of the issue. For example, the question might be, "To what extent do you agree that social media has had a negative effect on political discourse?" A weak thesis: "I agree completely that social media has had a negative effect on political discourse." A stronger thesis: "While social media has undoubtedly amplified polarization, the spread of misinformation, and political tribalism, it has simultaneously democratized access to political information and created platforms for voices that were historically excluded from mainstream discourse. The net effect on political discourse is therefore negative in some respects, but genuinely transformative and positive in others, making the picture more complex than a simple negative assessment would suggest." That thesis is responsive to the "to what extent" nature of the question. It does not just answer yes or no. It says here is the extent, and here is why the picture is complicated. That kind of thesis shows real intellectual engagement and is exactly what Cambridge examiners are looking for at C1 level and above. I want to give you one final set of practice introductions that you can try on your own. I will give you 10 essay questions. For each one, I want you to choose 2 and write complete introductions. Hook through thesis either now or as practice over the coming days. These questions cover a range of topics and types, so they will force you to adapt your approach each time. Question 1. Is it more important for a child to develop emotional intelligence or academic intelligence? Question 2. To what extent has globalization had a positive effect on the world economy? Question 3. Some people think that the government should control what people eat by taxing unhealthy food. Do you agree? Question 4. Discuss the advantages and disadvantages of people working in jobs they do not enjoy, simply because the salary is high. Question 5. How important is it for cities to preserve green spaces in an age of rapid urban development? Question 6. Is social class still a significant barrier to achievement in modern societies? Question 7. To what extent should individuals be responsible for reducing their own carbon footprint, as opposed to governments and corporations? Question 8. Does the study of history have practical value in modern life, or is it an indulgence we can no longer afford? Question 9. How has the rise of remote work changed the nature of professional relationships and workplace culture? Question 10. Some people argue that beauty standards promoted by media and advertising have a damaging effect on young people's self-image. To what extent do you agree? Choose 2. Write them fully. Revise them using the checklist. And if you want an extra challenge, try writing the same introduction 3 different ways. Once with a statistic hook, once with an anecdote, once with a bold claim, and then decide which version you think works best and why. This kind of deliberate practice, practicing the same skill in different ways, with different topics, in different voices, is what builds genuine competence. Not just knowing what a good introduction is, but being able to write one reliably in any situation, on any topic, under time pressure. That is the goal, and it is absolutely achievable. One last thing before I actually end this time. I want to talk about the growth mindset around writing, because writing is one of those skills where improvement can feel invisible for a long time. You practice, and your essays still get returned with corrections. You rewrite your introduction 4 times, and it still does not feel quite right. You read something brilliant and you think, I will never write like that, and it can feel discouraging. But here is what I know to be true about language learning and writing specifically. The progress is often happening beneath the surface, before you can see it in the output. Every essay you read, every introduction you write and revise, every time you study the difference between a weak thesis and a strong one, every time you notice a good hook and think about why it works, something is building inside you. Neural pathways are being strengthened, patterns are being internalized. And then one day, sometimes suddenly, you sit down to write and you find that the words come differently. The introduction flows. The hook feels natural. The thesis is clear before you have even started. And you realize that all that practice was not wasted. It was just quiet. Trust the process. Write even when it is hard. Revise even when it is annoying. Ask for feedback even when it is scary. And come back to listen and practice as much as you can. This is the work. And the work done consistently and with genuine attention always pays off. I promise you that. Okay, now I am really done. I am Jessica. This is English in Advance, and I will see you very soon with more practice, more learning, and more of the real useful language work that is going to take your English to the next level. Take care of yourself, keep writing, and I will see you next time.